Yes, we can see it.
Vincent, I can't hear you. Vincent, we see you talking, but we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, open up that chat box again. I apologize for that. Not sure how much everybody said. What I said leading in is like a good captain on an air flight. You know, if you've taken a flight on any of the airlines, sometimes you hear the captain come on board and apologize for a late start. Rest assured, we will have an on-time arrival. We will get through the material, and I'll get you to the end of this material by our designated time. Without cheating you out of anything or moving quickly through anything. We can make that up easily. Hopefully you hear me now. Thank you for indicating, Dorothy, you can hear me. We'll be talking about two sections today. Hopefully what you see on the screen, hopefully I'm sharing this properly. You should see a slide that says Grant Writing, Navajo, Ramah Navajo School Board Part 3, Online Grant Opportunity Portals. We're going to be talking about two sections today, two things today, Part 3 and Part 4. First of all, I'm going to talk about how to navigate, considering what we talked about yesterday. The next thing is, as I mentioned yesterday's discussion, a lot of the time that grant writers and those responsible for grant development, they spend a lot of time on looking for grant opportunities. I'm going to try to present an opportunity to try to streamline that process by describing how to navigate through some of the major online grant opportunity portals that are out there. And I'm going to focus on two of them. One on the federal grant agency, federal agency side, that includes, the Department of Education, Department of Energy, HUD, those federal agencies. And then I'm also going to talk about some online search opportunities that are on the private, available through the private sector. So let's go ahead and get started here. Course description, as I talked about yesterday, this course offers fundamentals on solid grant writing and guidance on how to make grant proposals stand out. What I'm going to be talking about today, as I alluded to, is number 5 and number 6. Number 5, navigating a search for grant opportunities through online grant portals. And not only how to navigate through them, but an understanding of the philanthropic process. What are these agencies and what are these private organizations and foundations and corporations? How do they think? How do they work when it comes to philanthropic opportunities, grants in particular? Talk about that a little bit. And then number 6 is I'm going to segue into the last part of the presentation today, and that is actually working on the components of creating a quality grant narrative. And, my goal here is to present information so that participants will have a much better understanding and be able to enhance their skill set to know that the 7 components that are made up of a quality grant narrative are pretty much the same no matter if you're applying for a grant through a federal agency or through a private foundation. So that's number 6 there. That's how I'm going to finish off the presentation this afternoon, actually walk through that part of it, and then we'll finish out that section with a little bit of a group activity like we did yesterday 2 or 3 times. So we only have one of those today. So yesterday, I talked about at the top of the grant cycle there, I talked about the community development process, soliciting information from the community.
Oh, man,
I
here
also
got
talked
one,
about establishing the project
meeting.
team.
Grant writing.
I
Okay.
am going to ask,
No, this is something else.
if you don't mind,
This is,
for the
so I
group,
have to get off then.
if everyone wouldn't mind muting their
I can't,
microphone
I have to go into the
on
internet
your
to
end,
obtain the
because
workflow.
with
Wait, maybe
10,
I can
15, 20 people on your end, all I
hasn't
hear
reached me yet,
is
Mr.
clicking of keyboards and
let
a
me close
lot
it
of
out.
a lot of static. So if you
Let me
wouldn't
close this
mind,
out. Maybe
please
we
put
save
your
this thing.
microphones on mute as I go through. Okay.
Okay,
Yesterday,
came in, yes.
top of the cycle,
Right,
talked about the
process.
community,
Okay.
then segued into talking about the project team, if you
Give me
recall, and project
5
team
minutes.
planning. Then moved into
Okay.
over
Right.
on the grant cycle, the organization. I started talking about grant development, using the logic model, and developing SMART goals. Now today, a little bit of discussion on how to navigate, how to look for grant opportunities, and then finish off with the actual grant, the dynamics of the grant proposal itself.
Hello.
So just to give you a little bit of information that you may or not already know, I'm going to be focusing the first part of this presentation on grants.gov, the online portal that I'm most familiar with. It contains literally billions of dollars of grant opportunities that are available to just about any organization out there that you can think of, with over 900 different individual grant programs from all the federal agencies, Department of Education, Energy, HUD, EPA, you name it. If it's a federal agency, there are grant opportunities available that they administer. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And I'll try to do my best to point out where there are some opportunities that are native centric, because there are such things that are out there. So I'll talk about that. The first one I want to talk about in any detail here is grants.gov. www.grants.gov is the online portal of choice when it comes to looking for grant opportunities that are administered by federal agencies. Now, they changed their homepage a little bit. This was the most recent one I have. But what I want to point out is there's a band of blue right across just above the middle, a band of red, and just above a band of red, there is a band of blue that gives some links there. It starts with, it says home, and then next to that, learn grants, and then the most important one, search grants. Next to that, applicants. Next to that, grantors. Then system to system, followed by forms, and then connected and support. I'm going to be focusing on that icon that says search grants. Also, what I want to point out is at the top right under the big heading where it says search for grant opportunities, under the word opportunities, towards the end of that word, you'll see a couple little links up there that say help, and then next to that, register and log in. One of the things I would recommend that all of you do, especially those responsible for grant writing, is to register yourself with grants. If you haven't already, register yourself with grants.gov. Create a profile on grants.gov so that you're able to receive information. Lisa's asking, how do we download the presentation material? I'm going to send it to you. The short answer to that, Lisa, is I recorded yesterday's presentation, which included the PowerPoint presentation that you were able to see and my voiceover. I'm doing the same thing today. And what'll happen is, if not today, most likely tomorrow, and by the end of the week for sure, Crystal, who you saw, and Lewis, who is our marketing coordinator, will reach out to all of you with links to the presentation. Probably a hard copy link, which you can download to your desktop or laptop, and also they'll probably give you links because Crystal was talking about putting it on YouTube. So there's a variety, it's a multimedia type of approach, so we'll be able to send that to you so you can see the material. I'm gonna move something here. There we go. Did to make an adjustment to my screen. So that's a very, very good question. Back to the presentation here, top right corner under the word opportunities, help and register. I would take the time, if you haven't already, to register, create a profile on grants.gov, because you'll be able to set up a profile, which I'm going to show you. The profile will set the filters that you might establish to be able to get grant opportunities sent to you directly on into your email in basket on a weekly or frequent basis. And you can create filters so if you're looking for specific types of federal grant opportunities related to education or community development or capacity building or anything like that, you can create that profile so that those grant opportunities from whatever agency you choose, or all agencies, can be sent to you. Or you can do it like the old-fashioned way, basically. If you look at this screenshot, what I'm showing you, what I want to point out is on the left side of the screen, the column on the left side underneath the big blue letters that say search grants, because that whole column there is where you can make, and you can do this on a regular basis, or you can do this to set up your profile for long-term searching for grant opportunities, but it gives you a lot of options. If you look over to that left column at the top, it says basic search criteria. So there's different things that you can plug in there, such as keywords. If you know the type of grant, for example, you might be interested in, is it education related? Of course, if you put in the word education, that's a very broad topic. You're going to get a lot of grant opportunities sent your way. So you can be as specific as you need to where it comes to keywords, depending upon your needs. Underneath that, you see a couple different things, one called opportunity number and another one CFDA. Both of those are different type of tracking numbers that the federal aid, that grants.gov, in coordination with the federal agency, uses to track specific grants. And a good reference of that is over in the very middle of the page, you can see what appears to be a whole list of grant opportunities, and what's highlighted in blue, you can see is an opportunity number. So if you happen to know an opportunity number, you can very much narrow down your search by simply plugging in that opportunity number. Or if you happen to know the CFDA number, which is another tracking number, you can plug that in as well. Every grant has both of those that you can use. But getting over back to the left, you can see that there's a variety of different ways that you can filter, aka narrow down your search for grant opportunities. It says grant opportunity status. You can indicate forecast, which is grants that are planning to be coming out in the near future. You can narrow down your search by posted grants already in the system. Or I don't know why you'd want to look at closed grants unless you're doing some kind of research or archive grants, but most of the time we look for forecast or posted grants. And you can see the number that's listed to them to show you at this particular time, when I took this screenshot, there were literally over 3,000 grant opportunities in a broad sense, over 3,000 grant opportunities available in those major categories of forecasted or posted. Then underneath that, you'll see a series of boxes stacked on top of each other. And those are more filtering types of options that you have. The box at the very top or near the top says funding instrument type. And it's got a couple sub boxes underneath it. The very top one saying all funding instruments, which is probably a good idea to select. Underneath that, cooperative agreement. And if you're not familiar with a cooperative agreement is really a grant between a federal agency and a recipient. It just happens to have more strings attached to it. It probably has more interaction or more demands or more requirements from the federal agency than does a standard grant, which is the box right underneath it. So if you're looking for those type of opportunities, you would check those boxes. And underneath that, the next box you see says eligibility. So there you've got a variety of different things. You can indicate all eligibilities, or you can narrow down the search if you're, I know you're not, but if you were a city or a township or a municipality, you might check that first sub box that says city or township governments, or there's a box underneath that, county governments, and then the box underneath that, if you can't read it, says for-profit organizations other than small businesses. And then it's cut off, but underneath that would be for-profit businesses, just by itself. Then the box underneath that is category. Those are your broad categories: agriculture, arts, business, community. It's cut off, but right under community would be defense, and then education, and so on. Those are your broad categories. And then underneath that, you've got the different agencies. So you can see there's a lot of ways that you can filter your grant search. You can either go on and do it long-term by creating a profile in advance and selecting some of these things, or you can periodically go on to grants.gov and do your search manually and pick these filters kind of on the fly, so to speak, as you go in and do it on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis, and select the type of filter you want to put in place so you can narrow down your search. If you don't do that, you will literally see thousands of grant opportunities, and that can be a very, very overwhelming task to try to go through that. So you want to use these filters to the best of your ability on grants.gov to try to filter the process. Whoop, ahead of myself, nope. Here's just another screenshot, a blown up version of what I just showed you. These are the filtering mechanisms that you can use in grants.gov. This is just a clearer picture of it, just what I described a few moments ago, just a little bit bigger looking at. You can see what I talked about: opportunity status, opened or closed. I'm on the left column, going from top to bottom. Funding instrument type, cooperative agreement or grants, eligibility, as I mentioned before, and then over on the right side, as I mentioned, the major categories of the major areas, and then underneath that, the agencies. So that's just a closer look at just what I was talking about a moment ago. One thing I do want to point out on this screen, and this is relatively new, for those of you that are not familiar with grants.gov, relatively new, and I want to say it's only been available for about the past 2 years. In the eligibility box that I talked about a moment ago, here's a much better view of it. On the left side, you can see where that red arrow is pointing in the bottom left. It says eligibility. It's a very new category. And what that says there, if you can't read it, it says Native American tribal governments federally recognized. That filter did not exist 2-3 years ago. That's relatively new. So now you have that opportunity to focus in your filtering efforts here, to focus on grant opportunities, to give you one more level of filter so that you're able to look at grant opportunities that are more native-centric driven. That, like I said, that did not exist 3 years ago. So it's a wonderful opportunity, considering, you know, there are only, what, 565 or 556 federally recognized Native American tribal governments at this point in time. So that very much narrows the field of grant opportunities and makes that selection a little more easier. So you can see in this screenshot, I've indicated on the left side, forecasted and posted grant opportunities. The funding instrument type, all funding instruments, so that would include cooperative agreements and grants, as well as procurement contracts, but you can see there's only one. And then the eligibility, Native American tribal governments federally recognized, 1,351 grant opportunities, that those types of entities would be able to apply for. That's still a lot of grant opportunities, and that would include all different focus areas, education, community development. So it narrows down the field, but there's still a lot of grant opportunities out there. So my point here is the more you understand about grants.gov and the more you're able to navigate through this process, the easier it is to find grant opportunities.
Vince,
Yes.
question. This is Alvin. Sometimes we're not eligible for a recognized tribal grant because we're a tribal organization. So I think I see below that you have a Native American, other than
Yes.
tribal organization. Does that say other than federally recognized?
Yes, and I apologize, it's cut off, but that, you're absolutely right. That is, I would, in your case, indicate both, check off both boxes. Native American tribal governments federally recognized, and the one right underneath it that got cut off, and that's Native American tribal organizations other than the above. So that would open up for those tribal entities that by indicating both boxes there, you're indicating that you're looking for grant opportunities for federally recognized tribal entities and non-federally recognized or state recognized tribal entities that don't have federal recognition. Yeah, good question. So yes, that I would indicate in your case you might want to indicate both boxes. Okay, good question. So the screen wants to jump all over the place. What happens, let me go back here to this slide. Sorry about the jumping around. My mouse is a little bit sensitive. By indicating these filters, what you're hoping to receive from grants.gov looks something like this on this screen. This is a grant opportunity. This is what's referred to as a synopsis. So what you want to receive, and by doing those filters or creating a profile, is to receive on a regular basis grant opportunities that are filtered to meet your needs. You'll receive something that looks similar to this, a synopsis. What I like about the synopsis, what I think is very, very user-friendly, is at a glance, if you look at this, I know some of the print is small, so I'll kind of briefly walk through it with you. What it does is it provides you basically a snapshot of the grant opportunity. And also not only a snapshot, which is referred to as the synopsis, it also gives you links to the actual package, to the actual grant narrative, not the narrative, but to the grant NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, which gives you much more detail. So these synopses usually are 1 or 2 pages. They're very, very helpful because at a glance, you can kind of look at this and see, is this grant opportunity, this one happens to be on, this screenshot happens to be on historic preservation grant funds for underrepresented communities through the Department of Interior Natural Park Service. Might not fit your needs, but for demonstration purposes, you can see, if you could read, I'll read it for you, or at least point out a couple things that I think are important. This synopsis shows you not only all the tracking numbers and the name of the grant, but as you look at it, especially down towards the bottom left of the screenshot, you can see a very pertinent pieces of information. One is expected number of awards, and you can see that there's the number 12 listed there for this particular grant. And underneath that, it gives the CFDA indication number so you can have another tracking number. But look underneath that, there is a line item that says cost sharing or matching. Remember we talked about the matching and the leveraging yesterday and matching? This particular grant says no, it is not a requirement of the grant. Can you actually put matching resources to it? Perhaps you can, but you would only be able to get that level of detail by going into the NOFA. So you would, if that were something you really wanted to check out, then I would recommend downloading the package and drilling down through the its notice of funding availability, and where the details are really spelled out, because as we all know, the devil's in the details. But you can download the package. If cost sharing or matching is not an issue for you, that's great. It tells you. Let's move over to the right side, and you can see the screenshot is a little bit old. You can see the posted date that says August 20th of 2018, and last updated same day, August 20, 2018. Couple lines below that, you can see what's probably the most important. That is the closing date of the application. Of course, in this screenshot, we're past the closing date, but we always want to pay attention to what that closing date is and be realistic with ourselves, that if the closing date in real terms is, for example, what's today? We're already on May 12th. We're at mid-May. If the closing date of this application were June 15th, four calendar weeks, 4+ calendar weeks, is it realistic, depending upon the complexity of the grant application and your project team and your ability and capacity to put together the narrative and pull together all the components, as we talked about yesterday, including outside resources if available, approval processes by board of directors if necessary, or tribal council, et cetera, is a 4+ week turnaround enough time? This gives you, every single application will give you when the grant was posted, when the deadline, and then you'd have to make a collective decision amongst yourselves. Is that a realistic amount of time based on the complexity and what has to be put together and the approval process that it has to go through? Listed below that is some more pertinent information at a glance, and that is the award estimated total program funding. You can see it says $500,000. So 12 awards total, $500,000 of total award monies. And underneath that, also good information. What dropped to the bottom there, it says award floor, which means the minimum grant for this would be $15,000. Right above that, it says award ceiling. That means the maximum amount would be $50,000. So the range of the grants, there's going to be 12 of them, and there's going to range from $15,000 to $50,000. So here's another clue. Is this something your group would want to pursue? First of all, is a $15,000 to $50,000 range of award something that you want to spend your time and resources pursuing? It doesn't have a match, so that might be a good indication that you don't have to pull in outside resources, but is that award range something that you want to pursue? As I talked about yesterday, some tribal entities have stipulations on that. If it were below $50,000, they might say it's not worth the time and energy to put together, because it's going to take us, based on history, it's going to take us at least 80 to 120 people hours collectively to put this type of grant together. And when you put a dollar value on that, the amount of people hours is more than the award floor of $15,000. So it might not be worth the effort of putting it. On the other hand, you might say, this is fine, let's pursue it. I love the synopsis that grants.gov gives, because very, very quickly, you or your project team can make a determination whether or not you want to pursue this grant opportunity or move on to something else. You don't have to take it necessarily to the next level, which is to download the NOFA, which tend to be anywhere from 15 to 45 pages in length, with copious amounts of details, including the ranking system and all the supplemental material and all the attachments that have to come with it. You can bypass that whole task, the very time-consuming task, by taking a look at the synopsis. This link with grants.gov also, as you can see to the top right, the little red highlight there, the one I want to point out is the one apply. You can not only get an idea of if this grant is pertinent to your needs, you can also download the package if you wish to, and there's probably going to be several components to the package, including its own budget, material, and the application itself, which I'll get to in a minute. But you can also bypass all that and go directly to go, basically to apply. So the Synopsis is a great tool. And as I said before, you can use that by doing your searches and indicating the type of grant opportunity you're looking for. And I think anyone that has any inclination at all to understand grant writing needs not only to have the skill sets to be able to put the program together, but also have the skill sets to be able to do a comprehensive search that is not an overwhelming task of you or your grant writer, your grant writing team, or anyone. And this is a way when it comes to federal grant opportunities to streamline the process. And I love this process. I think this is great. So, sorry for the jumping around, very sensitive mouse. This is where we were. The next step, this is just the bottom of the page, the bottom of the synopsis. And I want to point this out to you too, because this particular, it's the same grant I was talking about before, but you can see it's giving you a little bit more information. You can see the blue box in the middle of the page is eligibility, and then the box below that is additional information. Do not bypass looking at this information, because it's also a very significant clue to just how complicated or not complicated this grant would be. First thing I want to point out, blue box in the middle of the page, it says eligibility. And if you look into that box, it says eligibility applicants. This is critical. Who is eligible to apply for it? And look at that shopping list there. City or township governments, state governments, Native American tribal governments federally recognized. You might be able to be also in non-recognized as well. County governments and others. So here's a real clue that this is going to be one heck of a competitive grant, right? It's relatively low dollar amounts, $500,000, with only 15 awards, ranging from $15,000 to $50,000, right? We know that much. Now it looks like everybody under the sun can apply for it at this point. Additional information says eligible applicants, and they give some other criteria that I'm not going to go into because it's very specific to the grant, but you always want to take a look at it and see if there's any details in there you need to be aware of. Below that, it gives you a little bit more information on the agencies it's coming from, and I want to point out there's the description. So in less than 50 words, you've got a description of this grant, which also gives you an idea of just how complicated or if this grant is a good fit for you. If it is, as I mentioned, you can click on the package or go directly to the application process. And this would be the next thing you see if you click on the package. These are your downloadable pathways to the actual grant application itself. And what I want to point out, even that little arrow got a little skewed there, what it's pointing to at the bottom right of your page is it should be, it's covering up the word, but it should be pointing at the word called preview. Next to it, you see the word apply. You want to click on the word preview, and here's the reason why. If this is something that might be of interest for your organization, regardless of the grant of what it is, but if this is something that of interest, you want to look at preview. And let me just jump ahead to the next screen. Yeah, okay. I'll get to that in a second. Preview gives you an opportunity to download all the components before you start the application process. And that's what you want to do. You want to look and see through the preview process, what are all the components, what the application is standard, so there's going to be no magic behind that. I'll show you that in a minute. But you want to see what the other requirements and the other attachments and what are the other documents other than the narrative that are needed for this particular grant. Some are more complicated than others. And as you can imagine, when you start getting into environmental issues and energy issues, for example, there's a lot of attachments that might be and a lot of approvals. So you want to download all the different components to your desktop or to your laptop so that you can start the application process independently. You don't want, at this point, if you even if you're interested in it, you do not want to click on the apply. Reason being is you click onto the apply, it's going to take you right to the application. And these applications have what's called a timeout process. You're only allowed to be on the literal application of grants.gov for X amount of time before you're timed out, and you would literally lose everything that you have, and you'd have to start over. You don't want to do that until you have all your ducks in a row. Till you've downloaded everything to your laptop or desktop, and you've started the creation process of your narrative, and you've downloaded all of the attachments that need to go with it, and you filled them out to the best of your ability and have them signed off on it. They need to be signed off, approved and signed off. You want to have all that at your disposal way before you click on that apply process, because that takes you to there you go. Here's what you want to look at. On download, I clicked on the preview, as I mentioned before, and here's a list for this particular grant. There are 4 downloadable items, and they're listed here in the bottom left of the screen. They're still in that same grant, but I haven't initiated anything yet. I'm still in the look and see mode. But now I got an opportunity to see at a glance here the 4 particular download items that need to be complete for this particular grant. And I can click on any one of the 4 or all of the 4 actually, one after another, and download them as well as a PDF to my desktop or laptop, share them with others on the project team, and we can fill them out to their best of our ability. If you can't read them, the first one says application for federal assistance. Now that is a PDF fill in the blank online application, and it's standard. I'll show you a screenshot of that in a minute, but you still want to download it. I would recommend downloading that application, the standard application. It's called SF424. Download it, print it out if you wish to, pencil it in if you want to do it old school, so that you know what the questions are. So when it comes time to actually doing the online process of filling it in, there are no questions in your mind. And I say that because some of the things you might have to do some research on. For example, one of the questions on there is what congressional district you are located in, where your corporate office is located in, and what congressional district your project is located in. Now that might be 2 different congressional districts. You need to know that in advance. You don't want to be in a situation where you're applying and you're in a time situation filling out the application and realize, oh my God, I don't know what congressional district I'm in. I never did know. How do I find out that information pronto? And where is this, this project of this community center? Is it in the same congressional district, or is it the next one over? I don't know. You're going to have to find out. You're going to have to reach out somehow and get that. It's available, but it might be time consuming to get it. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation ever. So another reason to make sure, look and see what the package forms are, download them to your laptop. The next one, assurance of non-construction programs, that is particular to this particular grant. You can download it. It talks about if you're doing bricks and mortar and construction. I don't know all the details of that particular download off the top of my head, but obviously it relates to non-construction. Interesting, I don't know what the next one is. It just says attachments. So that's probably going to be in tandem with what's stated in the NOFA, the Notice for Funding Available, and that could be just about anything. That could be environmental forms. It could be anti-lobbying documents. So you'd have to download that and take a look at what those documents are as well. And then the last one says budget information for non-construction programs. That's a budget form all in itself. So and there might be more depending on what the grant is. So again, if this is something, if this or any particular grant is interesting to you, your grant person can download this information quickly You've got the synopsis to give you a bird's eye view, a quick understanding of what it is. And then from there, you can start downloading things. So to make your team's work process easier. So next page, a little bit more information on the package requirements. Here's some more stuff that they've got. De minimis certification, that's a downloadable PDF. Budget justification. So you can see there's a whole bunch of things here. Look at the very bottom one, if you can read it. Project images worksheet. That's because this is this particular grant is a bricks and mortar for historic preservation, and they probably want to have site plans and pictures of the site and that type of thing before approvals are going to be granted for this particular grant. So again, to what degree are those pictures needed and what are the parameters? That type of detailed information you would find in the notice of funding availability, which is also in the package. So another piece of information. The next one I want to show you is the standard application. Every federal grant application has what's called the SF 424. You can see that at the small print underneath the word searching. It says application for federal assistance. The good news is that this is a standardized form for every federal grant application. So this is something that you can fill out. I would recommend downloading it. It's a PDF, it's a fillable PDF, so you can download it, save it to your desktop, go through the motions of filling it out in advance. A lot of the information is pretty straightforward. Who are you? What type of grant is this? What are you going to call this grant? Contact information. That's what all those highlighted areas are there. There's nothing really out of the ordinary there. In the middle, it's in the middle there, or just above the middle, it says applicant information. You can see a couple highlighted areas. Legal name of the organization, that would be your legal name. Underneath that, your employer, your EIN number. You need to have that information, and your DUNS number. You would need to have both of those. Not everyone knows those EIN number and DUNS number in advance. You might have to get that from your finance people, but you need to have that, and it's a mandatory fill in the blank document. Underneath that, pretty straightforward stuff, street address, that type of thing, email address. So that's pretty straightforward. And then second page of the grant application, the type of applicant, it's got some drop-down menus there to select. Most likely you would select a tribal entity as one of the options. Name of the federal agency that you're pursuing, whether it's Department of Education, Department of Energy. I missed what it was on this one, but you'd fill in the actual agency. The funding opportunity number is listed there in the middle of the page, and then down below that, the actual name of the grant, so that your application gets matched up with the actual grant. So you got to put the full name in there. And then down towards the bottom there, you need, and this is something you need to do in advance, because you can see, look at the very bottom there, the highlighted area, it's number 15, and it's a required field. It says descriptive title of the applicant's project. So you need to come up with a name for this, for this project. It might make a whole, you might think that makes a whole lot of sense, and that's pretty straightforward and kind of nonsensical, but you need to, like anything else, you need to come up with a name and stick with it, because when it comes time to, and think this through, because when it comes time to application, this application goes down in perpetuity. So you need to have that filed. And the last page I want to show you here, page 3, is at the top of the screen is the congressional districts that I mentioned before. And also just below that, near the top of the screen, it says proposed budget, the start date and the projected end date, and it's a mandatory field. So you got to have a timeline in here. So all of this, as you can see, is hopefully this is coming together now. The actual application and the narrative is kind of done simultaneously. You want to have, if this is a grant you want to pursue, you want to be able to download, as I mentioned before, all this information, understand what questions are being asked, do your research, and at the same time, you want to be able to move forward with the next part of this presentation, and that is the narrative that fits this grant application. So these are kind of done simultaneously, if you know, believe it or not. All right, middle of the page, just above the middle of the page, budget amounts, federal amount. If it's 100% from the agency, you put in that number. If there's any matching amount, that's where it says applicant, that's where you would put in your leveraging or matching dollar amount. And then any other items of the budget that might come from different outside agencies. It says state, local, and other, and program income that you might be plugging in. And program income would be, for example, if you're receiving Indian Housing Block Grant funds and you're designating some of those federal funds to be used as an offset for this program. It can be done. Some federal funding agencies allow you to use their funds as leverage in other federal funds, some don't. So you need to know what your federal funding allocations are and the requirements of that. I happen to know that the Indian Housing Block Grant allows you to use a portion of those funds as leverage for other federal funds to a certain amount. That's where you put in, you'd be able to enter that in here as well. And so there's other questions, an email address. Most of the rest of this application is pretty straightforward. But that's the application, and I alluded to the fact that there are other supporting documents. Another clue that I want to give you in doing a federal grant application through grants.gov, double, triple, quadruple if a particular grant is something you want to pursue, double and triple, quadruple check with the notice of funding availability, basically the guidelines for the grant application, to make sure not only you've got all the applications, that you're aware of all the applications and you filled them out and got approval if needed to the best of your ability, that you're also aware that what the deadline is for application. And another thing that's going to be buried into the NOFA most likely is the ranking scale. How, at the other end, how that federal agency is going to rank or score your application. You really do need to know that, where their emphasis lies. And that usually is spelled out along with all the other required documents in the NOFA. So you need to know how they're going to score, how they're going to rank your application compared to other applications. Is that also worth the time and energy? Just exactly how complicated is this? What things need to be included in the narrative? To what degree? That is all spelled out in the NOFA. I've been showing you in these screenshots the applications and the documents. The NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, is really where the details are held. And it's if this particular grant shows promise, or any grant shows promise through grants.gov, it's worth the time, it's worth the energy to certainly to go through the NOFA word by word, section by section, to make sure that not only do the required documents are filled out correctly and that you're aware of the timeline, but also what other subtle details are required in the application. And every grant application is going to be different. Every focus and every ranking on the agency's part, on the funder's part, is going to be different. Where are the little nuggets of information that you need to be aware of so that you can fine-tune your narrative to fit not just the documents that are required, that are pretty straightforward, your budget, the application, those are straightforward documents. Congressional district, pretty straightforward. Budget amount, straightforward. It's in the narrative where the subtleness to some degree and where the details are held. The NOFA is the gateway to having that information. So just a tip from one grant writer to another, and from a reviewer's standpoint to someone that may not be aware, this is where a lot of grant applicants fail. They don't realize where the point systems are. And that'll be spelled out in the NOFA. They'll break it down to where where the grant, they might say, for example, we're very much concerned about the capacity of your organization. So in your narrative, tell us more about your key leaders within the organization. Who are they? What are their titles? What is their experience? And how will they fit in? How much time will they spend on the project is from a percentage standpoint with their overall responsibilities, how much time they'll spend, and what exactly will they do. And in return, that constitutes theoretically 25% of the points that you could earn in your narrative. So that's something you need to be aware of, and that's just one example. Maybe more points, as I showed in the demonstration yesterday, maybe additional points might be awarded for matching, even though it's not a requirement. You might find buried in the NOFA that little nugget of information that says, even though it's not a requirement, if you put matching dollars in, first of all, you've got to be able to tell us who or what is providing the match, what that asset is, what the dollar value is, and also to make sure that that's incorporated into the budget, and explain to us how that's going to work. And in return, we will give you points up to a certain amount, let's say up to 10 points, based on the dollar amount. As I showed in that quick demonstration yesterday, that might be buried in the NOFA. So even though the synopsis says that there's no match, reading through the NOFA might discover that there's an opportunity to put yourself in a better situation and more likely to receive the award if you put matching amount in there, based on the percentage and based on the dollar amount. But you have to be very, very clear in your narrative to that effect, and you have to be able to convert that, as I mentioned yesterday, to dollars and cents so that it can be incorporated into your budget and to your budget's narrative. So the NOFA really is where the bread and butter is when it comes to these federal grants. That is something that is a wonderful opportunity that you'll see exclusively in federal grant opportunities through grants.gov for the federal agencies. But so unless you have other questions, I'm going to move on. I finished with federal agencies, but let's move on and switch over to the private sector, where things are a little bit different. Quite frankly, they're a lot of bit different. If you're pursuing or want to pursue grant opportunities other than federal agency funding that I just talked about, and start taking a look at private sector funding, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what I want to share with you is the mindset, what opportunities are out there, and the mindset that these organizations have, so you have a better understanding of their philanthropic purpose. So I'm going to move through this section rather quickly. Be talking basically about three different entities: foundations, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as I talked about yesterday, corporate entities such as Walmart, Bank of America, those corporate organizations, and then lastly, community funding such as First Nations, OESTA, I can't right out of my head, but we'll get to it because I have a slide to talk about it. Shakopee was the one I wanted to talk about, but that's a slide, and I'll show you that. So let's talk about the first one, foundation funding, real quick. This is one of the opportunities that are on the private side, and there's a lot of foundations. There's thousands of foundations across the United States, and a lot of them have a focus on Native-centric activities. Here's just a short shopping list of a couple of them that you may or may not have heard of. Some of the larger foundations other than Bill and Melinda Gates. You've got the Ford Foundation that has, one of its focuses is Native American rights. The Kellogg, the cereal makers, and Battle Creek, you've heard the commercials as a kid, literally they've had a foundation for over 100 years, and one of their focuses is Native American children, but it happens to be Native American children in Michigan. Archibald and Edith Bush Foundation, no relation to the past presidents, but regional tribal colleges is one of their focus areas. Robert Wood, I'm sure we've all heard of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They tend to focus on health and medical issues. Northwest Area Foundation, Pew Charitable Trust, I'm sure you've heard of that one. Lannan Foundation, I mentioned Bill and Linda Gates several times, and the Paul G. Allen, just to name 10 of them off the top of my head. Something you may not know, they tend to generate their income through their investments of the endowments that they receive through these foundations, invest their monies, and then they take those investment monies and use them as their philanthropic donations to the community at large. They distribute the bulk of their investments through income, and they're usually founded by an individual family or group. And let me go to the next slide here. Let's talk a little bit on the other side of that flip coin. There's another opportunity here through corporate funding. So a little bit more about corporate funding. They're a little different than foundation funding. Corporate funding, little list on the right there. I'm sure you can think of some others, but I mentioned Bank of America. Walmart was in the slide a few moments ago. They have a focus on Native American colleges. JP Morgan Chase, GE Foundation, when we start getting into electronics and things like that. Wells Fargo out of California, Youth and Family. Verizon Foundation. When I was way back in the day when I used to work with the Visiting Nurse Association, I got a grant for telemedicine from the Verizon Foundation. So that was a major achievement. That was a substantial amount of money back in the day. Also the UPS Foundation, and then the last one, the bottom, the one I find very, very ironic considering what happened in the Gulf Coast about 10 years ago. BP Foundation, which is not even American. You know, BP stands for British Petroleum, but they're a huge entity in the United States, and they give a lot of money these days, rightfully so, on environmental justice issues obviously because of the oil spill that they caused some years ago. But over on the left, you see some interesting things about corporate funding that I think the more we understand their thought process, the better off we'll be. Corporate funding, and I don't mean any of these things negatively. Corporate funding is an expression of corporate responsibility. In other words, it's all about them, basically, and not so much about us. I kind of alluded to that yesterday. Secondly, and more importantly, it's a channel for distribution of corporate profits to nonprofits. And I think the third bullet is probably the most important of all. It's an opportunity for them as a corporation to further their own mission and their own branding and their own corporate citizenship. It's not always necessarily about us. And I think the quicker we recognize that, the better off we'll be. There's nothing wrong with going after corporate funding, but you have to realize where their focus is. Their focus is on their own corporate citizenship. Because you can imagine, as you look at this list, a lot of these organizations are international, and global. They're huge organizations. So, you know, their corporate citizenship is important, especially in today's economy and what's happening globally. Now, where I go to find this information, where I'm most comfortable, both with community foundations and with corporate, is the foundationcenter.org. If you've never heard of that, there are a couple other agency or platforms out there that you can go to where you could search for private sector funding. But my favorite that I'm most comfortable with is foundationcenter.org. And just like with grants.gov, you can go on there, you can create a profile. Most of their services are free. You don't have to become a subscriber. You don't have to create a profile. You can go on there at any time, any day, anywhere, as long as you have internet access, and you can do your own search and look for opportunities. And before I go on to the next one, what's nice about foundationcenter.org is you can do some of the things you can with grants.gov. You can search, if you know the name of a particular foundation or corporate entity, you can do a search that way. You can narrow down your search by looking for educational opportunities or youth opportunities or teaching or whatever. You can narrow down the field that way. And what's nice is what the Foundation Center will provide for you is access to the funders' resources. You can actually go on through foundationcenter.org. For example, you can go to Wells Fargo, for example. You could go into their financial statements if you want to. You can go into what's referred to as their 1099 form. You know, we as individual citizens every year file our 1040, which is our tax return, IRS 1040. Corporations file what's called an IRS 990 form. That is their equivalent of a tax return. FoundationCenter.org allows you to go on and look at the most recent, in this case it's 2000, and 21, you might be able to look at their 2020 financial statements, their 990 statements. What does that do? It tells you a lot of different things. It tells you how much money they contributed, to whom, and to how much. It also tells you who your leaders are, and it tells you, it gives you an insight into their philanthropic motives. So, and also their financial resources. So that's a lot of good information, and it allows grant writers in their research to help identify other potential information. Community foundations would be the next one that I want to finish up with. But it's just a little bit more information on foundationcenter.org. Like I said, you could do research on it. But the last one I want to finish up on, there are a couple Native-centric. If you don't know this already, there's some community foundations on there that do focus on Native American activities. Shakopee, as I briefly mentioned before, is one of them. I think they're based out of Minnesota. In Dakota, obviously, shakopeedakota.org. If you haven't gone onto their site, I'm sure their homepage has changed, but you're still able to do research. You can see that little red circle. Outreach is what they call it. They don't call it philanthropy. They don't call it grants. They just call it, at least on this time when I did the screenshot, outreach. But they've given millions of dollars across the nation to different tribal entities for different reasons, and they're definitely worth reaching out to and building a relationship with, and perhaps even submitting a grant application. So they might not have the same offer, none of these community situations are going to have the level of resources that the corporate entities or the foundations do. In these situations with community, it's probably the process you'll have to use is reach out to them by email, tell them a little bit about yourself, and ask them if you can apply based on your needs and what you see as important. You can't do that unless you do the second half of what this training is, and that is to develop the narrative. You've got to be able to talk to these communities and tell them what the need is and how you're going to approach it and what you've put together. So that, I think, is a perfect segue to move into the next part. So there's a couple more. First Nations, firstnations.org, part of First Nations Institute, First Nations OWISTA is another one, firstnations.org, and Potlatch Fund, based in the Pacific Northwest. Potlatch Fund is another one. But I think this is a perfect segue into the final part of the presentation. Number 5 here, we talked about searching for grant opportunities, for federal grant opportunities through the federal agencies, through grants.gov, and then segued over to talk about private opportunities through for community foundation, for foundations, for corporate entities, and for communities. And I want to move into the next section and the last section, and probably the section that will take us right to closing. In fact, I know it will, and that is on the narrative, because it's impossible to do any of these things that we've talked about so far, whether it's reaching out to a community foundation center or any of these entities, unless you've got a strong grant narrative. So this is a time to, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box if you don't mind, or verbalize them. And I'm going to go ahead. Give me an indication. Is this a good time to take a 5-minute break? Bathroom break, coffee break, drink break, smoke break? It is for me. So I'm at the very bottom of the hour, 12:30 my time. Is it okay if we take 5 minutes? Reconvene 5 minutes from now, 35 or 36 after the, I'll say 36 after the hour, to finish, to go into the last part, part 4, developing and writing the narrative. Let's do that. Let's just take a quick break and reconvene at the 35 minutes, 36, let's call it 36 minutes, okay? Oh, one more minute. All right. Just going to go ahead and get started. This is the last part of the four-part session, and I think this is absolutely the most important part, at least for me it is, because you can go through all of the motions that we've talked about in the past day and a half. You can communicate with the community. You can put together you can communicate with the community. You can get some directive, and is in the major initiatives, as we talked about yesterday. You can put together the project team. You can work on the goals, initiatives and goals, and break those goals down into infinite levels based on your major initiatives. You can do all the research in the world through grants.gov and foundationcenter.org and do all the research you want and find out the wonderful grants. But if you cannot articulate what you're trying to do, what the need is and what the solution is or what your plan is to move forward, if you cannot articulate those things, then you're dead in the water. Then everything that you've done is it's no good. You've got to be able to articulate to the funder. They're human, just like us, like you and me. They're looking at this from their standpoint, trying to understand, what you're trying to do. So we need to do our utmost to learn how to articulate those issues, following, as I mentioned yesterday, what I call the seven fundamentals, the seven basic rules or components of a quality grant narrative. So that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Not only what those seven components are, and give examples to the best of my ability of what they are and how they're composed and how to address them, but also the second half of part 4A and part 4B. That's part 4A. Part 4B would be, how we use our words. Remember, our moms used to say back when we were kids, it's not what you said, it's my mom did. It's not what you said, it's the way you said it to me or to others. Using our words to articulate what we're trying to do. So that's what the second half of part 4 is going to be about. The first part of this is going to be about the 7 magic components of a narrative and what they're comprised of, and then the latter half of it, up to closing, is going to be how we use our words and the semantics and those kind of things to get the point across, and some fallacies, some things that will have shut down grant applicants in the past. Basically, best practices and or from a different perspective, dysfunctional things that have shut organizations down because they weren't able to articulate. All right, we're doing the last section here, create a strong grant narrative. We're in the last part of the grant cycle here. We talked about organizing to the nth degree. Now we're getting into the writing and the actual packaging of the proposal, the writing of the narrative. So here they are. I kind of alluded to these before, and in a bird's eye view, here are the components of the grant narrative, what I call the magic 7. If you understand these, you can apply for any grant under the sun, whether it's a federal agency or whether it's a private foundation, because one way or another, you're going to have to articulate these things. And that is the summary. And a lot of times the summary, as we learned in high school and college, we do the summary last because it tends to combine all of the different components of what we're trying to do, correct? So even though the summary technically is put at the beginning of most grant applications, it's usually something that we do last, hopefully not as an afterthought. But a lot of times, some kind of executive summary is due, whether it's 1 paragraph, 1 page, or 10 pages. We've got to have something that captures the essence of the whole program. So summary, it outlines the organization and the proposed project as detailed as possible. And the other very, very important components, and I've talked about some of these already, but first one, the statement of need. We need to provide clear, concise, well-supported, and I'll get into that in a minute, well-supported statements of, or statement of the issue, of the concern, of the project, or whatever. We must be able to articulate what the need is. Then the third part is, as I talked about quite extensively yesterday late afternoon, and that is the developing the initiatives and the goals. So hopefully our work with our community and with our goal development, the specific goal-oriented, realistic, and measurable activities. And from that, everything else falls in place. The next part, the fourth critical part, is the actual design of the program. In other words, what is it you're doing? What is the plan? A detailed narrative of the plan of action. You've got to be able to articulate what the plan is based on what your needs are and your goals. And if you've done your goals correctly, as we talked about yesterday, and broken them out sufficiently, you should be able to do the fifth thing, and that is to provide an evaluation, to be able to provide some kind of review or expectations of performance, operation, and improvements. So you can articulate that in your narrative, and you can also at any time provide an answer to a funder that says, how are you going to measure your success? Or where are you in this process? How are you going to achieve your benchmarks, your thresholds? You can't do that without articulating your goals and so forth, as I mentioned yesterday extensively. The sixth one is sustainability, explanation of your long-term fundraising plans. I use the word fundraising, from a global standpoint. Explaining your long-term planning and your sustainability and your capacity. As I mentioned yesterday, not every funder is willing to be there, assuming that they're going to be the funder of choice in perpetuity. They want to know that you're doing something above and beyond their funding to sustain the program. You're always looking for and have cultivated opportunities for funding in addition and resources in addition to the funding that you happen to be pursuing. So sustainability, short-term and long-term, that also can be included in your goals and using the logic model to break down your goals. And lastly, the budget. And the budget, of course, comes in two varieties that are always included. One is the actual dollars and cents. You saw that a couple slides ago with the actual application. There's usually a budget document that records simply the dollar amounts, but there's also every time you've got to be able to articulate that data into your narrative so that your narrative is compatible with your actual grant form of dollars and cents. So you've got to be, as it says there, revenue and expense within the narrative description. And of course, I'm going to add the phrase being ultimately transparent. Those are the four categories or components of a strong grant narrative. And the stronger each one of those is, the better off your grant narrative. And these 7 areas are components that would apply to any grant, anywhere, from any funder at any time. They may not call it these things by name, but this is what they're looking for. You can refer to it this way, and you may actually see it called this way. But in a lot of the NOFAs, they don't necessarily use this nomenclature. They don't, these semantics, but this is what they're looking for. So let's look at each one of these. That's what I want to do. The next section here is to try to break down each one of these sections so you have a better understanding rather than just a bird's eye view here in a couple choice words. I want to try to spend a little bit of time breaking this down. As I mentioned before, the summary, typically we do that last when it comes to our term papers, research papers, dissertations, if we're PhDs out there. We do it last because it tends to capture everything. This is my scenario yesterday with the orchestra leader. The orchestra conductor knows all the music for all the instruments, not necessarily an expert on any particular instrument, but knows how they fit into this grand scheme of things. And when you put it all together, you hopefully have an opus or a beautiful piece of operatic material that is facilitated by the orchestra conductor. That's what the summary is here. The summary is the orchestra conductor taking everything. You've heard perhaps the word, getting back to conductor, the overture. This is an orchestrational term. The overture is basically, you hear that at the beginning. If you're watching an opera, for example, let's say the musical Cats, there's always going to be at the very beginning of Cats, it could be anything, you know, it could be Phantom of the Opera, it could be Cats, it could be anything, Les Miserables. There's an overture. The overture, what the overture is every single song that's in the whole play, within the whole opera, condensed into one piece. That's an overture. That's likened to a summary. The summary is the same thing. It's describing the overall, without getting into the specific of the details to where they're dedicated. This gives a summary of everything. And as you can see here, there's 6 or 7 bullets here listed. It identifies the organization. It includes the mission statement that I emphasized yesterday. Third thing, super important, it emphasizes the key points. It clearly communicates the need. It states the cost of the project, the time period, and the results. So it's kind of difficult to do this until you've accomplished these other things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You know, the statement of need, the goals, etc. You do all that where you've had your detail, then you capture it in your summary. It's literally impossible to do it the other way around, unless you're clairvoyant or you have some kind of superpower. Usually the summary is done last because it captures everything. Even though at the application it's the very first thing most of the time, we do it last. All right, sample. Just a quick sample from another friendly tribe. Proposed to utilize its ICDBG funds to conduct rehab on 80 tribal managed units, 46 low rent apartments, 34 mutual help. This goes on and describes what it's all about. A little bit more, talks a little bit more in the summary about how this particular tribal entity is going to target 80 units in their housing stock that need rehabilitation, and it lists what those are. And down at the bottom, the second paragraph gets into the budget stuff. Now, it doesn't get into a whole lot of nitty-gritty detail. That's reserved later on for the description. But it does give a nice overview, and it hits all the major points. Again, can't do this until we've definitively described and crunched all those numbers and done all the other components of the narrative. Here's where we really start getting into some of the nitty-gritty. The statement of need. This is where we really need to have, to the best of our ability, you really need to have a combination of things. Information, both narratively and statistically. The statement of need must clearly articulate, to the best of your ability, the need of your grant proposal, the need of the project, basically. Must be well written, of course, and reader friendly. What I mean by reader friendly is not loaded with jargon, which we all tend to do these days because we live in a society full of jargon in our respective industries. I do it too. I just said ICDBG without explaining what that is a moment ago. It's an Indian Community Block Grant Program. I apologize for that. See, even I do it, falling into that trap. So we want to avoid that, and we want to make our programs as user-friendly as possible by skipping jargon, and I'll get into that a little bit more detail a little bit later. We want to include quantitative data and statistical analysis where we can gather that information. There's nothing wrong with putting statistical information in your narrative as long as it makes sense and it lends support to the overall focus of your statement of need. Trends or expert views from reliable sources, not anecdotal information, but real legitimate sources where you can get them. Census data is just one example. It could be a variety of different things. Reference from reputable research, reputable research where you can get it, literature if it's available, comparative data I use quite often. I know other tribal entities have used gone to Native Americans in Philanthropy. There's their website right there, nativephilanthropy.org. They are the source of a lot of information from all walks of life that are Native-centric. And that's just one source, one reliable source. My point being here that there's a couple things. There's nothing wrong with using statistical information. There's nothing wrong with using a variety, showing that statistical information in a variety of different formats, whether it be bar charts or pie charts or a variety of different graphical information. That's quite fine if you can do that. And to the extent that it supports what you're trying to do, your statement of need. And explain the statement of need also explains the time frame and why securing funding is critical. As I mentioned, there's an example of it, but as I mentioned yesterday, the statement of need also needs to avoid, to some extent, a situation where it's so gloom and doom that the reader, on the other hand, doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. So we got to be careful in the way that we phrase the need. There could be a real crisis out there or a real need, but we want to be able to describe the need to the best of our ability without making it so out of touch and so unfixable that it's a foregone conclusion that there's no way on planet Earth that even though you're asking for this funding that you'll be able to do what you say you do because the need is so dire. We don't want to paint that kind of a picture. This also goes to talk about quantitative research where we can do it and to explain that. And here's just using that same tribal entity with the same scenario, just a sample of the need that they presented. They talk about maintenance and housing in this situation, dealing with low-income housing tax credits to upgrade and make things safer. I see if they have any statistics in here. Yeah, they do on the second part of this. They talk about the second paragraph. They use a little, and I have to give them some heck for this. You see, they're using some acronyms, and they shouldn't be doing that unless they've explained it earlier in prior paragraphs that I missed. But low income using it's Indian Housing Block Grant. They should have spelled that out and then put in parentheses IHBG. Same thing with Indian Community Development Block Grants, ICDBG. Acronyms, getting away from that. But here, getting back to the purpose here, they're trying to explain in detail, and this is just a snapshot of their statement of need. It's much more comprehensive than this. In the third paragraph here, they go into talking about some statistical information and some budget information. 46 units, as they referenced before, at a total cost of 1.4 million and some change, and they break that down later. But here, they're trying to the best of their ability, give statistical information and at the same time explain the statement of need dealing with low-income housing, which is the majority of the housing units that they have. And that, if you read it in detail like I did, they haven't done this project since the 70s. So as you can imagine, their infrastructure is dated and obsolete, and obviously some of the amenities and appliances that they have in these units are old, super old, so they want to replace those. So that's what they're talking about here. And they go into some detail about other things here, insulation and accessibility and things like that. And they give a lot of good information. Again, this is just 5 or 6 paragraphs out of a 40-page narrative that they submitted. So any questions on that? That's, we talked about the summary very briefly that captures everything and it's pretty straightforward. We talked about the statement of need and approaching the statement of need of not being gloom and doom, but actually literally trying to describe where the sense of we want to convey a sense of urgency in the statement of need without making it sound so dire that it's unfixable. We also want to provide statistical information, stay away from anecdotal type of references or hearsay. We want to stick to legitimate information, statistical information from reliable sources where we can get that. And there's nothing wrong with quoting. Be careful, make sure that you quote your reliable sources. You want to give credit where credit is due, and you don't want to ever be indicated as plagiarizing something without giving credit. So if you're using Native Americans philanthropy research, which is extensive, you want to reference that the source of material was from Native Americans in philanthropy or United States Census, state of New Mexico, or whatever. You want to be able to reference that material or wherever you got that material from, as long as it supports the cause, supports the mission, supports the program to the best of your ability. So that's statement of need. The next one, we talked about this yesterday. I'm not going to dwell on it too hard because we really killed it yesterday. The initiative and the goals. Everything you've talked about so far in your narrative is in sync, hopefully, with your initiative and your goals. And as we talked about yesterday, breaking down those major initiatives into those baby step goals using the logic model process or something like it to develop our outcomes and our results. Outcomes always measured as some kind of number. 60 participants will be trained in the webinars that we're doing. Remember that scenario from yesterday? And because of those 60 people being exposed to the webinars within the school year or fiscal year, because of the 6 webinars that we're going to do, the result is 35 people an increase of 35% of our tribal members will be exposed to the topics that we're doing in our webinars, topics to be selected at a later time. And we're doing 6 of them. So that was my scenario yesterday on a major initiatives and the goals. And you folks were nice enough to provide some of your major initiatives. A community center is one I remember off the top of my head. That's a very, very big, comprehensive, big bricks and mortar. And I talked about breaking that down, at least theoretically in my mind, into 3 phases. Phase 1, planning and development. Phase 2, the bricks and mortar and or constructions, including site preparations and all the GC and the subs and architecture, all of that being done. And in phase 3 would be the actual implementation, staffing and implementation of services. So, that was the real life scenario that you presented, among others, that you presented yesterday using the goals / initiative / goals and goal development logic model. So here's just a little example that using the scenario that's on the slides here from the Friendly Tribe that we're quoting from the initiative that was stated back in their statement of need, improving tribal housing conditions, as you recall. And the goal was to complete the rehab of 80 units over the course of a 5-year period because they hadn't done it in some time and everything was obsolete. And there were some safety issues involved with that too. So that's their goal, at least one of them. That's the one we're running with. And the outcome that they spelled out in their statement of need and in their goal development was literally and specifically project outcomes. 46 low-income rental units will be rehabbed within that 5-year period, and 34 mutual help units will receive energy upgrades. That's very, very specific, very, very specific over a specific time frame. Your initiative and goals will look nothing like this. They don't match up with the scenario I talked about with webinars, but you can see from the example that they're following the game plan, and they're doing very, very well. And I think they've done a very good job so far of giving an example of an initiative that's totally different, but still following what we're talking about here with the narrative and using the seven holy components of the grant narrative. Okay. More initiative goal sample project results. Here in this slide, project outcomes, see the numbers there. Now here, the project results over that 5-year period, which to them is short term, by the way. That's short term, 5 years. Project results, tribal families will realize decreased energy consumption by 30% and utility costs by 25% because of improved energy efficiency. Now I'm just jumping ahead. Now, what's not shown here, just for sake of argument, and I didn't want to take up 16 slides doing it, they had all of their statistical information to back up these numbers. They just didn't pull these numbers out of the air. They did their research. They knew that they had 80 units and that they were going to do 46 of them. 35 of them being mutual help, and they knew they had the statistical information to show that in doing so, the results would be 30% utility and then the 25% improvement in energy efficiency. They had all the statistical information from the Department of Energy and from the state. I think they were quoting FPL for the equivalent of FPL. FPL is Florida Power and Light. They were using the equivalent in for Kansas, I think it was. So the same thing. They had their statistics in a row, and they did provide that type of information as backup in this section. So as we called yesterday, here's what their logic model looks like. You know, a simplistic version of it. You know, my simplistic interpretation of what they're doing using the logic models. You can see towards the bottom of the screen, lower left, the initiative for them was to improve housing conditions. Their goal, based on their statistical analysis at the time, was the rehabilitation of 80 units. Their outcome, and they did have, I'm mistaken, they did have a 1-year short-term initiative of 46 units being rehabilitated, 34 of them mutual help, getting the energy upgrades, and the long-term results over the 5-year period, the longer-term results, was the 30% reduction in energy consumption, along with the 25% reduction in utility costs. Perfect textbook example of a logic model matrix, a simplistic version of it, granted, and also so far in their narrative, a very definitive description, very statistical analysis so far of their of the same thing, spelled out verbally. Now, the design. This is what, you know, here's the criteria. Design should describe how the organization will accomplish the goals and objectives that I've talked about. Here's where we're getting to the actual plan. What's going to happen? This can be done with a detailed narrative, of course. You need to be explicit. You need to explain why the selected method or plan will be best at achieving the objectives as you've outlined in your logic model. And this is where your opportunity exists for laying out your plan of including, you know, what supplies you're going to need, the equipment you're going to need, including, you know, the scenario yesterday with the front end loaders, if necessary, or volunteers. That's the resource, equipment and resources, perhaps, needed for the project, including who's going to do what. Remember, we talked about, you know, some grants, some NOFA is going to ask, who are your key people? What are their titles? How much time as a percentage are they going to spend on this project? And what exactly are they going to do? This is where that scenario comes into play in your design, depending upon the degree of difficulty contained in the NOFA and how much explanation is needed. It goes on to talk about here back on the slide, you know, the timeline, and hopefully you have a timeline that meets those objectives that you spelled out in your logic model, and the list of who's going to receive what as far as benefits and services. So that might be with that community center. You know, phase 3, what services are going to be provided? You know, are they going to be for elders? Are they going to be for general tribal members? Are they going to be for youth? Are they going to be for veterans? Are they going to be for all of the above? What are those services, and what are the results of those services for those particular demographics? This is where you could put in that statistical, that projected, that pro forma statistical analysis. That's where you put this. Who's receiving what, to what extent, and you'd also probably want to incorporate that in your logic model into your results to the best of your ability. You see, it's all intertwined. You know, I'm dividing it into different components, but it's all intertwined. And a little bit more on design implementation. There's 10 things I think I have listed here. That if needed, environmental review, if needed to be done, contractor bid process with that community center, phase 1, and overlap into phase 2. The way I look at it would probably include at least phase 2 when you get into the actual site preparation and building. Prior to that, you're going to have probably environmental review taken care of. You're probably going to have the architect or engineer involved in the design, and then your solicitation of your GC, general contractor, and all the subs, et cetera, and that's all part of the bid process for the contractor. I see that as phase 2 with the scenario with the community center. Finalize cost, finalize work schedule for contractors, begin procurement for kitchen. I put kitchens in there, so that could be with this tribe scenario. It also could apply towards the scenario with the community center. Solicit bids and produce material for kitchen appliances. That is specifically referencing the tribe's scenario. Review bids. Complete kitchen remodels on 13 units. Monitor construction. Monitor compliance with the scope, especially if you're using federal funds to work on to use for the construction. As I talked about yesterday, you've got prevailing wage issues, and you've probably got Davis-Bacon requirements for the wages that are paid and the submittal of timesheets and payment documentation of the contractor, the general contractor, and the subcontractors, whatever you might have. And then final inspection and closing documentation. All of that, depending upon the scenario, might be included into your design concept. This is more of a sample from the friendly tribe that I was talking about. Inspections and monitoring will occur throughout the implementation phase. Of course, it has to be. That's going to be incorporated into the design once work on the selected homes is underway. Inspections will consider, excuse me, quality of work, compliance, of course, with federal and tribal regulations, Davis-Bacon included, and or prevailing wage requirements and other standards that might be included, and tribal, it says there, tribal regulations as well. So that's design, and then the next one is evaluation. It's impossible to do evaluation if you haven't done the prior sections, if you haven't used the logic model or something like it to define your goals, your initiatives and your goals with their short-term and long-term outcomes and results. And obviously the design, you cannot evaluate anything. You cannot articulate here if you haven't done those prior steps. They are a prerequisite to the evaluation. The evaluation section should explicitly and objectively describe how the project accomplishments and processes and results will be measured. Can't do that without your goals and objectives. Can't do that without your description. They must be consistent with the project's goals. That goes without saying. They must state how the evaluation will measure the objectives. That's part of your goal development, right? They must state how the evaluation will measure the accomplishments. Those are part of your benchmarks based on your goals. So I see what I mean here. You cannot evaluate. You cannot do these things. You cannot talk about accomplishments if you don't have benchmarks in place based on your goals and your initiative to measure performance along the way, or to project performance. At this point, we're talking about the grant narrative. So these are projections. All right. You must state how the findings will be used, or project how the findings must be used, and clearly state what data, resources, etc. will be collected and how the records will be kept. You know, and we talked about that yesterday. Just alluded to the fact that you've got to protect personally identified information. Well, you've got to maintain all these records. If you're using Davis-Bacon, or mandated to use follow Davis-Bacon requirements for the payment of your general contractors, employees, and their subs, then there definitely are certified payrolls and documents you have to maintain, and the general contractor has to maintain, and you need to be privy to that information, and you need to be able to troubleshoot. By the way, if you're looking for training on Davis-Bacon, I do that too. As you can tell, I'm pretty versed on prevailing wage. So if you are serious on moving on to that community center, for example, and the phases that I was referring to, nice of me to break it up into phases, get to the point where you're using federal dollars, not so much tribal money, but when you start the theory of using federal dollars then you're going to get into prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon, and I can help you with that if you're interested, if it comes to that. But those records need to be maintained and compliance needs to be maintained. Back to our friendly tribes examples, a process of evaluation will compare the actual work of the project and the proposed implementation schedule. Of course, that all has to be documented. A product evaluation will review the quality of the actual rehab work in this case in compliance with quality standards. Of course, we hope that's being done, etc. The next one is sustainability. I talked about that before. I talked about referring to it as fundraising, capacity building, sustainability, whatever phrase you're looking for. Funders want to make sure, and for your own benefit, you want to make sure that your short and long-term plans include searching for legitimate areas of funding from other, what I refer to as non-traditional revenue. Non-traditional revenue. Looking for funding opportunities outside of the federal agency to look for funding, and whether that's foundation funding, private corporation funding, community, or whatever, private donations, and donations from other federal agencies, including the Indian Housing Block Grant that I rattled off a few minutes ago. Sustainability. The sustainability section, no matter what you call it, you've got to be able to describe how you're going to sustain yourself long term. Outline specific future fundraisings, or whatever you call it. I'm using the phrase fundraising. Provide a blueprint for the funders and for everyone, basically, of how future long-term plans will be implemented, will be attained and implemented over the short term and long term. You need to be realistic to the best of your ability and keep actual amount of available resources in mind. We talked about yesterday, I even had you go through a little bit of a group exercise on, where's the leverage? Where are those resources outside of your internal operation that you can call upon? Can that be part of your long-term sustainability, your long-term capacity? Can that be manipulated in a way to be used as funding for a specific grant application, as leverage for a grant application, or even long-term? Where are those resources? That should always be top of mind in your discussion. Long-term fundraising, call it what you want, but that's what it is. Looking for resources. Just to share with you, that's the part of my title at the Native Learning Center. Compliance and Resource Development Director. Even the Native Learning Center saw that it's more than just the operations that we do, that the training we do. We're always looking for resources from within within ourselves, within our department, within the tribe, and outside of the tribe. We call it resource development. Same thing here. You've got to be able to always, ongoingly, be able to articulate what your resources are outside of the organization for a particular grant, like we're talking about here, or for just in general. And be able to articulate that to everyone, to nurture those resources and leverage them into short-term and long-term benefits for your organization, and be able to articulate that where needed on their grant application. So another very, very, very important part of any narrative, quite frankly, very important part of any operation. Sustainability here. This is the Friendly Tribe sharing with us the sample here on sustainability. They've been working on this. They got the funding for this. They haven't done it for, since 1971, which is a really long time. And they've got the resources to do it, and the resources to do it, and the need to do it. They've got everything in place. So the last part, last part of the sample here is the budget narrative. And that, as I mentioned before, comes in two parts. David says, Davis-Bacon Act and related act, contractors, subcontractors must pay their laborers and mechanics employed under the contract no less than the locally prevailing wage and fringe benefits for corresponding work on similar project in the area. Absolutely right, based on trade and the county that the work is in. So the difference between a carpenter and a plumber and a sheet metal mechanic and a heavy equipment operator, those are all different trades. They're going to have different levels, and it also depends on the county that they're working in the state that you're in. But that is all absolutely right. And your obligation, Dave, if you use Davis-Bacon, is there going to be certified payroll records that have to be generated by the GC for all of those subs, those contractors in those trades. And part of our obligation as the owner of the project and the facilitator of the funds is to make sure that the compliance is placed and to make sure that the contractor is submitting certified payroll records that are accurate, et cetera. You are absolutely right in that. That is absolutely right. So thank you for pointing that out. And you're on it. I can see you're on it. Okay, last part of the budget comes in two parts. One is the narrative part, and the other is, and I don't know if I have it here, there are just some samples here, but one is the actual form, the budget form. And the two must obviously equal each other. They must, your narrative has to be in sync with what you're submitting on the actual budget form. They have to coexist together. They have to equal each other. Are you asking, are there instances when Davis-Bacon can be waived? That's a good question. Yeah, the one that comes to mind, David, real quick, is if the tribe has its own wages. If it has its own, what's referred to as tribally determined wages or forced construction. If you've got your own wages, that's one way where Davis-Bacon can be waived. And there might be others, but that would be a labor relations question. And what I could do if we ever get to that point is refer you to labor relations specialist. I know HUD has them. If you were using HUD money, we could refer you to the HUD offices, regional offices of labor relations, where they could give you a definitive answer. And probably all the other federal agencies that use federal funds have the equivalent. So we can check into that. I can't think of any off the top of my head where Davis-Bacon can be waived other than if you have your own tribally determined wage, but there might be some out there. I'd have to look at it. And if you had a specific example of where or a project, then I might be able to follow up on that and maybe give you a more definitive answer from a reliable source. But my reliable source would be HUD's labor relations people. And I can ask them anonymously, so it wouldn't be a problem. Back to the budget, two parts, as I mentioned, the narrative and the actual form itself, and they have to equal. And here's just the example that I used before of our friendly tribe that is given an example. They've spelled everything out. They know exactly how much they're using. See, here's their narrative. Simply put, briefly put, here's their narrative, and it matches up very nicely with the form that they would have to submit if they're using, if they're submitting any kind of a grant. They would actually use the budget form. And this is just a replica of it. So their narrative matches their actual budget form to the penny. All right, we're done with that. I wanted to see if there's any questions on you, because the latter part, the last remaining slides that I have, you've had some very, very good questions, by the way. The latter part of this, what I want to go into is actual writing techniques for the narrative, which I think is equally important. Things to use, things to avoid, which might be some eye-opening things for you. First thing I want to tell you, unless you have other questions for me, concerns, or comments, is talk a little bit about writing techniques in the time we have left. It's going to cover a variety of different things on how we use our words, right? First thing I want to spell out to you, not pun on one thing. One thing I want to articulate is the grant proposal demands a different style of writing. It is not an academic paper. It's not a novel. It's not a newspaper article. But it is what we refer to as a document of persuasion. And the writing techniques, I think, fall very, very nicely into Native American culture. Because grant writing really in and of itself is storytelling. And that's what we want to do. We want to tell a story, choosing our words carefully. We want to tell a story. We want to include statistics and facts, as I've pointed out, as much as possible, rather than personal opinions, anecdotal tales, assumptions, hearsay. We want to avoid that, of course, but we want to tell a story. We want to include a variety of citable sources, and I mentioned before. We want to include a variety of different presentation techniques, bullets, tables, graphics, as I talked about before, pie charts. Those are all fine and good. If the notice, remember, going back to the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, if the NOFA allows you to use those kind of stylistic approaches, that's something also to take a look at the NOFA. Make sure that if you're including beautiful colored graphics, bold type, underline, all kinds of different fonts and different things within your narrative, make sure that when your narrative is eventually uploaded to grants.gov to match up with your grant application, that all of that is able to make the transition. That would be kind of some of the details that are buried in the NOFA. How are your attachments uploaded to match up with your the applications, which are standard? Remember, we talked about the application itself is standard. The budget, there's a budget form that is standard, and there's a couple other standard forms that are PDFs that are fill in the blank type things. Where you're uploading attachments is going to be most likely in your narrative. You're going to have that done in advance, but you want to make sure not only is it done in advance and met everything, but that any of these fancy things that we're talking about that we all love to do, bullets and graphics and pie charts and underlines and bolds and indented paragraphs and all kinds of things, make sure that that can be uploaded without losing your format. So that is something that's going to be included in your NOFA. Be careful. Look to make sure that you don't run the potential of losing anything and all the time and energy you spend on making your narrative beautiful. Pictures included. Remember we saw back there was that one NOFA, or that one grant application we're looking at, and I said, look, it includes uploading of pictures. So if there are going to be pictures, for example, on the thing that I was thinking about with the community center, on site development and stuff, make sure that those pictures can be included in your narrative. And if they're not, can they be uploaded, without losing them completely, or losing their formatting, or whatever can happen to pictures when they're uploaded and not done properly. So just a best practice to look at. Back to the screen here. The very last, convey confidence, pride, and passion. Avoid the gloom and doom in your description of the need, as I mentioned before several times. State the problem if it's some kind of an issue and a real problem. Present the passion. We want to convey passion and pride and confidence in what we're doing, but we want to stay away from gloom and doom and creating scenarios where we create an illusion with the reader that there's no way that the problem can be solved no matter what we do or how we use your money. We want to do that, but we also want to keep in mind that this is, and I'll get to the point here in a minute. I want to make a point between writing styles here. I said that it's storytelling, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. As I mentioned before, we want to avoid acronyms. We want to, where we can, if we can, especially if we're applying for grants through a private foundation or a corporate funder or community, we want to use the funder's name where we can incorporate it, keeping in mind that someone on the other end related to the foundation or corporate funder or community is going to be reading this. We want to include sentence variety if we can. We want to avoid starting our paragraphs and our description using the same words over and over. We want to use some variety, which is good writing skills to start with. We want to be direct and concise, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. We want to choose our words carefully. We want to be careful. The bottom right, we want to be careful. We want to use bold and italics and underlying and indents and pie charts and blah, blah, blah. We want to use all those things to the best of our ability to get our point across, but we want to be careful that we don't lose anything and create huge gaps in our narrative because a pie chart wasn't able to be uploaded because of some stipulation that the NOFA has on uploading on Word documents or PDFs. Very, very careful of that. So all of these things are good. All of these things we need to be aware of. Typical format is we probably learned in high school and college, the APA format, unless told otherwise by the NOFA. Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margin, so on, etc. Unless the NOFA tells you otherwise, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they have different specifications on spacing, font selection, etc. So, other than that, you probably default back to APA style that we all learned. So here's where I want to make another distinction between readability and effectiveness. And I want to make a huge distinction. Look at grant writing as the cloud or bubble, whatever you want to call it, on the left side. That's what grant writing is. It's narrative writing. It's the method we learned in elementary school, high school, college. It's the storytelling. The main focus is to persuade the reader. The end user here is the reader at the foundation or at the agencies. We're trying to influence the reader or readers, and we're trying to tell our story, as opposed to technical writing. Now, we might have some technical writing incorporated into our grant narrative, especially when it comes to statistics and pie charts and all those kind of quantitative things, but it's not the main focus of our writing style. Reason being is technical writing is the opposite of the main focus. It's more on precision. The goal is to get compliance or to become safe or to establish facts. Look at the difference between my examples, two examples I can give you. One is inside our kitchen and the other is inside our garage or something like that. Inside, imagine if you're in the kitchen, you've got a blender, right? What comes with a blender? An owner's manual. If you're in the garage, you might have a lawnmower or some type of other piece of equipment, and one comes with that, an owner's manual as well. Well, how are those owner manuals written? Basically all the same. You're all instructed to do the same thing. Identify the power source, activate the power source, be careful, do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. The purpose of technical writing, by and large, is to provide policies, procedures, steps, and most of the time geared for safety and productivity. It's a different style of writing, right? Or when you order something from IKEA or Wayfair or whatever, and you get a dresser and you get instructions, those are technical writing. It's laid out in a technical, sometimes it's all graphical these days or pictures, but the words are written in a technical writing skill. And we need to separate the two and integrate the two in our writing styles, with the main focus of our grant writing style being on narrative writing, storytelling, with integration of technical writing where needed. Now, a lot of new grant writers do not know this. And we need to use this to our advantage when we're writing our narrative. We're actually, to the best of our ability, overall, telling the story and supplementing it where we can be, because we don't want to sacrifice passion. We don't want to sacrifice passion. That's what helps sell our narrative, is the passion that we put into it. But yes, we need to incorporate the passion with statistical information, and that's where technical writing comes in. So it's a real delicate mix of narrative writing and technical writing, with the focus being more on narrative writing. So here's some other look at it. Narrative writing features on the left column, technical writing features on the right, so we understand the difference. Narrative, the column. Narrative writing tends to be more persuasive, which can be good. That tends to be more free-flowing, more descriptive. It tends to be longer because we tend to use more words to convey our passion. It tends to be also, its downside, it tends to be more vague. It also tends to be emotion-oriented. That's good. That's the passion coming out. And it tends to have a slower pace. Now, technical writing is geared just the opposite. It's more specific. It's more concise, it's factual, it tends to be shorter because there's more words, or I'm sorry, less words. It tends to have a clearer meaning. It's action oriented, sometimes safety driven, and it's based on speed a lot of times, and productivity and safety. Stop what you're doing. You know, you can see that on the owner's manual. If this happens, stop what you're doing and do this, this, and this. That is safety driven, right? So here we need to understand, again, to see the difference and be able to understand where our writing techniques are flowing. We want to focus on the left, but keep in mind that the downside of narrative writing can be longer or force us to use more words to make it longer. It can be more vague. It can be more emotion driven. Nothing wrong with those things, but sometimes with our narrative, with the NOFOs requiring from us, we have to be careful that we don't slow down the pace of reading too much with the narrative style. This is a balance of science and magic here a little bit. You know, we're combining the science of narrative writing with the combination of narrative and technical skills. And the skill sets we have to be able to call upon both are what's going to help us create a narrative that conveys the passion, conveys the emotion, but still provides the statistical information, the factual, specific meaning that we're trying to get across. Keeping in mind that we're writing the narrative for a reader at the other end, not a user, not an owner's manual user concerned about safety and productivity, but rather we're trying to persuade the person, and that's where, but there's a balance here, you know, being able to integrate both. This is where grant writers earn their keep. This is where the grant writer, as the orchestra conductor, needs to be able to orchestrate that project team to put together the perfect combination of narrative writing, that's the music we're trying to attain here, with the technical components that need to be, the piccato and the staccato and all the different techniques that are used to play the instruments. A lot of the technical writing may come from those people that have an engineering background or an accounting background or project management background, who are integral components of the project. But keep in mind that the information that they may give to us may be focused more on technical components. We need to be able to take those technical components as grant writers and smooth the curves a little bit, soften the sound a little bit, so that we can use that technical writing to integrate into the larger component, the larger narrative of what we're trying to do. So a couple other things, and we talked about who's the target. Let me finish out the last few minutes here with the last slides of what we have, and that is on, again, more on who are the overall targets. Always need to keep this in mind. As big as the project is, as big as the importance of the initiative is and the goals and all those things we have to do, we have to remember who's on the other end, who's going to always keep in mind, and this is an educational moment too, for the village of people that we're working with on our project team. Who are the end readers? Who are we writing to when we put these narratives together? As you can see here, the narrative writing, we're writing to readers, as I mentioned, technical writing to users, and we're trying to find a balance between the two. Narrative writing, standards of success in technical writing are clarity and speed. Technical writing happens, we tend to speak, at least that's what I'm doing right now. I'm speaking a lot with technical clearance, or trying to anyway. Technical writing clearance in describing a passionate, hopefully my passion and my concern for grant writing overall is coming through to you all as I interject with technical components. Does that make sense? That's what we're trying to do overall in our narrative, is interject. Okay, thank you, Crystal. And Crystal sent in the Survey Monkey. Please take a moment, if not now, after the presentation, to click on that link and take the survey. That's how we keep track of our productivity and the results of what we do. And we do really look at those too, by the way. So back to what we're doing, as I mentioned, hopefully my passion is coming through in grant writing and describing how important it is as I interject technical components that support my mission of describing technical grant writing, and hopefully a way that's new to you, or to supplement at least your understanding, but hopefully it's a new perspective of grant writing, a new and respected perspective. All right, now here's, this is an example from the Seminole Tribe of Florida. This is just a quick screenshot of a sample of technical writing. This is just a snapshot of we're right out of my brain, of a resolution, obviously all technically driven. Yeah, you've probably seen these before. All right. Working rules. I want to get into this a little bit. This is very, very helpful, and this is a teachable moment for everyone, especially when it gets to the point of writing the narrative and putting everything together. Respect the meaning of every word, even though grant writing is a persuasive endeavor, a storytelling endeavor. We always need to choose our words carefully in what we're doing and maintain that balance of passion and technical skill. Understand that the potential each word has to impact the meaning and action, remembering that we're writing for the reader's sake. The end user here is the reader, not a user. Carefully and consistently choose each word. Ruthlessly eliminate any word that does not add clarity and speed. So I'm using a technical writing skill here, clarity and speed, to keep in mind that in our grant writing effort, our storytelling, our passion telling, our passion expression, we want to also keep in mind that we need to be clear, and extra words do not necessarily help. And here's some examples of some words and phrases and things to avoid. On the left-hand column, it says thing to avoid: fancy language, fluff, duplication, empty phrases, or long phrases. Those, and you probably know examples of these. In the middle, it gives some examples of those things to avoid. No need to use fancy language with the grant application. The people on the other end are as educated as we are, and they could probably see through crap as much as we can. So there's no need to add in fluffy language or throw in a bunch of acronyms or industry jargon when talking to people. You want to be straightforward and humble and explain everything with passion, but not to get fluffy or fancy, and things that can get in our way that we unintentionally put in, or duplication of phrases and words. We want to try to obviously eliminate that, empty phrases. So, some things to avoid here and there. And I think this might be one of the last ones here, yes. Narrative mistakes, or things that we fail to do sometimes, and that is practice good editing and good proofreading. And I want to add a third category in there, and that is to have thick skin. Because when you ask someone to do proofreading or editing, it should be done. It's requirement, a good practice, a best practice. But sometimes I know, and I do it too, you put a lot of trouble into wording things and wordsmithing, and then someone looks at it and makes correction. And this is where we need to be thick-skinned a little bit and take constructive criticism, because we really do need to represent our organization as best as we can, and editing and proofreading play a big part of that. And we want to give guidance to people who are editing and proofreading. Give them some direction. Don't just throw things at them. You want to tell them what to look for. Maybe different people look at the narrative or the application as a whole from a different perspective. Give them some guidance as the grant developer, grant writer, or whatever. You want to help those individuals develop skill sets themselves on editing and proofreading, because in the long run, it's going to make your application look better. It's going to make you look better. So we need to be a little thick-skinned when we do editing and proofreading, especially when, and you need to have others do this. You need to have other eyes look at it. So at this point, you know, if we were all together now, this would be a large section of time. I would go back and ask each one of you in your groups, remember the group activities we did yesterday, but what I would say to you is all the things that we've talked about over the past 2 days, and we have 20 minutes left in our time slot here. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to cut you out early. Don't worry. But this is the time where I would give the group and instruct you to go back and review. Hopefully you took good notes, you know, and go back to your notes or to your team, to your group, and use all the information that we talked about yesterday and all the activities that we did yesterday on the working with the community, identifying initiatives. And then we talked about developing the project team. And then you actually identified a list of potential project or initiatives. We call them initiatives. And then from there, you developed or had an opportunity to take your initiatives and try to develop a SWOT analysis, we call that. And then you took from that, if anything, you tried to take your initiatives and break them down to at least one goal, if not 2 or 3 small baby step goals, and then take those goals following the logic model concept and break them into outcomes, short-term outcomes and long-term results. All right, taking that information from yesterday, combined it with today's lesson on searching for grant opportunities and the awareness, hopefully that you've gained on how to do search and the importance of putting together the components of an application. And then most recently this afternoon, dissecting the holy grail, the 7 holy components of the grant narrative, the summary, the statement of need, the initiative and goals, the design, evaluation, sustainability, and budget. And here is the point where I would ask all of you to sit down to the best of your ability and try to take everything that you've learned, whether you've created it on the spot or you brought in some kind of initiative, and try to do this very thing. Start with a statement of need, develop it to the best of your ability. Doesn't have to be long. It could be 1 sentence or 1 paragraph. And then take the initiatives and goals you developed. Just basically start with your initiative and goals, and then develop your statement of need, or try to articulate your need, and then your design. And then from your design and your need and your goals, determine how you will evaluate progress. Also try to determine to the best of your ability how you will sustain, how you will determine or look for other non-traditional revenue sources, as I like to call them, fundraising, and then put together some kind of primitive, basic budget. This is where I'd ask you to get together. This is putting it all together, probably the hardest part, but hopefully you've got the material to do so. So I am going to, before we leave, I am going to give you a little bit of time here to think about it. If you want to share anything in the chat box, please do. But this is really what grant writing, the fundamentals of grant writing is all about. Being able to reach this point, not just for a specific grant application through grants.gov or through a private entity or whatever, but on a bigger scale, being able to articulate what grant writers do, how important their role is, how important grant writing is as part of the village that we have to orchestrate. Being able to take a nebulous idea and manipulate it to the point where you're able to achieve these things that you see on the screen and articulate them. Not just for a single grant, but for operation of your organization as a whole. Because I really believe what you see here, if you're able to answer these questions and articulate these 7 holy grail, these 7 components of the holy grail of narrative writing, you're able to accomplish anything with your organization. You're able to move it to the next level, which would be strategic planning. And I understand we are going to do a strategic planning session. So if that comes to fruition, I think it is, I think we actually have a date set up for that. You're going to hear a lot of this again. I'm not going to dwell, strategic doesn't dwell so much on the grant writing components, but you can see, as I alluded to yesterday, how they overlap, especially with the initiatives and the logic model concept, developing goals. If you're developing a goal on the short term, you can segue that into long-term strategic planning, whether it's 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, or even 50 years out, as I saw yesterday. So if we're going to do strategic planning, I hope that you all join me in that venture, because that'll be fun. And doing that, that'll be just one day, because a lot of that would be, you know, if you're joining me, it'll be a review of what we talked about today. Actually, I think it's a prerequisite. Taking this course today should be a prerequisite for strategic planning, at least for you folks, because we've laid the groundwork for strategic planning coming up whenever we do that. I think this needs to be a prerequisite, or if new folks are joining us for that, they should at least review the material, watch the presentation, because as you can, I think you can see what we talked about in this presentation is the foundation of strategic planning. Otherwise, they're going to be cold coming in. So either prerequisite, one of two ways, one of three ways. Participating in this course, which you all have done, and or going back in two ways, I guess. Participating in this course and or going back and watching the full 2-day presentation, 6-hour presentation, because I think it's without question the groundwork for strategic planning. If we're going to get anything accomplished, we need to refer back to what we talked about in this presentation. I hope you all agree with me, because that would be my plan going in to do Ramah Navajo School Board strategic planning session. I'm going to ask that this be a prerequisite for that, one way or another. Be as a prerequisite. Without it, it's just going to be a session. It's instead of something meaningful and really something that could be useful for you. So I'm done, basically. I'm done with this. I'm done with this. Done with the presentation. I'm going to stay here in the room. I'll stay here in the room to the top of the hour because we are designated to go to the top of the hour. Crystal might have some closing comments if she's even out there. I'm not quite sure. But she has posted some things to the chat box that I need you to take a look at. SurveyMonkey, and I guess that's the registration. Yeah, that's the registration for the, I'm sorry, that must be the, Crystal, are you there? Can you explain what that is?
I'm shaking my head. Yes, I guess you can't see it.
Thank you.
All good. Yeah, I'm actually just making a list of who's missing on my registration sheet. And there's quite a few that are in this room that have not signed up. So if all of you could just, or those who have not, if you already have, don't worry about doing it. But for those who have not, please click that. It serves as a sign-in sheet, essentially. And for those that didn't sign in yesterday, I wasn't in the room, therefore I can't tell you who was and was not here, which means you can't get credit for having been here or not having been here. It only shows on my end that you haven't. So if you want a certificate, then it creates an issue with that as well. So please, if you have not, go ahead and visit that link for registration and take a moment to fill all of that out. Please and thank you. And then there's also SurveyMonkey, and we're sorry to be such a pain about registration and signing up and whatnot. But as I stated earlier, I can only emphasize it so much. It's very important to our grant. It's how we're able to put on these technical assistance requests and so on and so forth. Without it, we can't do what we do. So that's why I'm urging and emphasizing the importance of this.
Very good.
That's it. That's all I had.
Okay, no, that's good. That's perfect. Thank you for answering that. What I'm gonna do is stop sharing, because I think you can see what's on, you know, what needs to be done with the 7 components of the narrative, if you're indeed doing that. But this, I think, as I mentioned before, not to reiterate too much, but in closing, any questions you may have. This has just been an immense pleasure for me to do this, to convey this information to the group. And I'm really looking forward to the strategic planning, and would encourage you to share with others and encourage them to, if they haven't participated in this session, to go back and review the material. So we're not starting, you know, imagine it's going into a college level class. I don't want, you know, it really needs to be a prereq, so we don't have to spend time going back and reiterating things that really were conveyed in detail over the 6 hours that we were together, especially since it's basically the same group. What is the ONAP region is the question from Emirac. What is our ONAP region, or what is yours? Ours is Eastern Woodlands.
If you're located in New Mexico,
Southwest?
I believe Southwest.
Yeah, I think it's Southwest for you folks. Yeah, I know that's right. Yes, sorry. Yeah, ours is Eastern Woodlands. That wouldn't do you any good.
Yeah, it's all dependent on your location.
Don't put
So
Eastern Woodlands, put Southwest.
This is,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
Cynthia. I have a question.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. I kind of got confused there. So if we didn't do a survey evaluation yesterday, we don't get credit for that? Or is that link that you put in there covering both days?
Yes, the registration link covers both days. The evaluation is to evaluate how Vince did, how you thought of the training, which is through SurveyMonkey. So Eventbrite is registration, SurveyMonkey is the evaluation. If you didn't register, I can't give you a certificate because it doesn't show that you attended. Therefore, if you filled it out, we can give you a certificate, because then I have a name and an email address and all of that information to forward to you.
Okay. All right. Because I registered yesterday.
Yep,
At the
I saw.
time, I didn't, yeah.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. At the time, I didn't know what the ONAP region was, so I just put unknown. So, okay. All right, then. Just making sure.
Southwest.
Yep, if you're located in New Mexico, you're Southwest.
This is Barbara. Can I ask something?
Yes.
Of course.
Can you read out the names that haven't registered?
Sure.
That'd be helpful.
Okay. Amaret was missing, but I believe she is filling it out now, considering she was asking the ONAP region. Then Barbara Maria and Boots Maria, that's who's listed in this room. It was missing.
Excuse me?
Yes.
This is Boots Maria, procurement. I've been interrupted throughout the whole training session, and I didn't, is there a way, is this being recorded? Has been recorded? If so, I would like to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Great. All
And
right.
hit the record, and we have both days recorded. And what we'll do actually is put the items together, so there'll be 2 separate videos because they're quite large, and we'll go ahead and email you links to get to those videos.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. If you don't mind, please go ahead and fill out the registration information for me so that we can go ahead and acknowledge that you at least attempted to be in the room.
Where do I go to register? I'm sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna go ahead and paste it. It's the first link, registration link, Eventbrite. I went
Okay.
ahead and put it in the chat box.
All right, thank you.
No problem. If she hasn't already, Lisa Baeza was missing. Monica Yazzie was missing. In this room, I have PHHC William Becker missing and Rose Maria missing. So if I can get those individuals to sign up, that'd be great. And then again, the Survey Monkey as well.
Okay, Crystal,
Yes.
what do you mean sign in?
The registration link?
I did,
That
I already did that. I even did the Survey Monkey too.
Okay, let me refresh. Let's see. Oh, that's odd. Monica's not showing you on the list.
I'll redo it again.
Okay, thank you.
Crystal, I'm sorry. Did I hear that there is will be a recording on this? Because same thing here. I had 2 IEP meetings going on the side at the same time too. So there were some parts that I missed. And then also, what's the latest info on the handouts?
We will, so we recorded both sessions yesterday and today, so fear not. Those will be available to you. And at the same time, we will provide those handouts that Vince mentioned to you. All those items are going to be coming from a Lewis Porter at semtribe.com. So Lewis Porter at semtribe.com, anticipate that. If for whatever reason, and we're going to try and get that out to you guys before the end of the week. So if by the end of the week, you have seen nothing in your inboxes or anything along those lines, email me, which I'm putting into the chat box, and I will be sure to get you all of those goodies that Vince is providing, the links and all that good stuff. So.
Yep. And it takes a while for the system to record it and get to me before I can get it to Crystal and,
Yes.
and Lewis. So it takes about a day to get it to me, and then as soon as I get it, I save it and then make it accessible to Lewis and Crystal. So it probably will be by Friday, or well, I shouldn't say Friday. Hopefully tomorrow, or the at the very latest beginning of the following week.
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the ONAP region?
ONAP. So if you're located in New Mexico, you would be considered Southwest.
Office of Native American
Okay,
Programs.
thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
So did
Are
you get
all
my
of-
survey yet?
Oops, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Was that Lisa? Was that you asking the question?
I just, I did finish the registration and survey. Do you see it yet?
Okay, I do see you on the registration. So yes, you're good on the registration. I don't have the survey pulled up yet. Let me check really quickly. I have 6 responses on there. So hopefully you're one. It doesn't necessarily tell me who fills it out. So as long as you filled it, oh, now I have 7 responses. So as long as you filled it, we're good.
I finished my registration portion, but it won't allow me to register I keep pushing that button, but it's not letting me go anywhere else.
That means that you're missing an item within the questionnaire. So just scroll back up and look carefully to see if there is anything missing. Because if there is an asterisk on something that's needed, it